What we're going to cover here, pretty much every great Western building has. It's also my hope to put this all together in a series of 3 to 5 minute long videos in a step-by-step format. For this job, because it's a few states away, we weren't able to be part of making sure the bolt pattern was correct prior to the concrete pour. Fortunately, I was able to speak to the customer and his concrete contractor before they poured to answer all of their last-minute questions. And because this contractor was so experienced, we showed up to one of the nicer pads I've been able to work on. We still had to check everything before we hung any steel, and this is how we did it. We started by grabbing a tape reel and checked that the slab was square and that each width and length of the building were correct. Checking the length is as easy as it sounds. We grabbed a tape measure from the top of the concrete notch on all 4 sides, simply to make sure that we had 2 40-foot widths and 2 60-foot long sides. I don't remember exactly what we had here, but it was within 1/8 of an inch, so the tolerance requirements were well met. The corner-to-corner measurement will tell you if you're working with a square slab. On a 40 by 60 like this, I'd say a 1/4 inch is good enough not to worry about it. But here we were a little bit better than that, so we moved on to checking the bolts themselves. First, we checked the mainframe bolts. This is where the main clear span frames bolt down to the concrete. The base spacing on this building is 20 foot, which along with 25 foot is pretty typical for our buildings. But your building may have a different setup, 22.5 feet, 27 foot, or whatever, based on your specific building length versus the base spacing. 60-foot long buildings will almost always have 20-foot bays, and a 75-foot building will almost always have 25-foot bays. But a 100-footer could have 20 or 25 or a mix. Anyways, for this building with 20-foot bays, we wanted to make sure that the center of the bolt pattern or the web of the I-beam was exactly 20 foot from the end of the slab and also 20 foot between each other. We then did this for the other sidewall, and then we verified the hold line. The hold line is the distance, usually from the innermost set of bolts from one sidewall frame to the other. Large complex buildings can have multiple hold lines, so just be sure to review the plans carefully. Once the mainframe bolts were verified, it was time to check the end walls. I like to measure from one sidewall, do some math, and then recheck from the other side, similar to how we measured the patterns on the sidewalls. For this process, your plans are absolutely necessary. End wall columns and jambs are, usually C. Sometimes there are I-beams, but they're almost always a C channel. And we measure to the web of the column, and then we either add or deduct the bolt offset to get the center lines for those bolts. C's either face inwards or outwards. We call it towing in or towing out. And the bolts, generally speaking, are 1 3/4 inches from the web or the tall part of the C. Knowing that the slab was the correct width, this measurement was easy. Of course, we still cross-checked from the other sidewall as well, and then we did it on the opposite end wall. The appropriate method, should the end wall's length not be within tolerance, say it's 40 foot 2 inches, 40 foot 1 inches, or it's just out of tolerance, check the measurements between each column or each set of bolts to each other. If the wall is not within tolerance, the method is to check the dimensions between the patterns or the bolts and then decide on any corrective action. This is some tough math, so if you wind up in this situation, give us a call so we can outline the process and help you troubleshoot. If your end wall concrete is exactly what it should be, there's no reason to do it this way. There's just too much room for error with the tape measure. There's what I call the dumb end of the tape measure, the end. But when doing it this way, the smarter person really should hold the end of the tape. The end of the tape measure slides back and forth a little bit to account for the thickness of the hook. It's hard to make sure that the hook is positioned correctly when you're kind of holding it there. So it may make some sense to actually hold the tape measure at the 1 foot mark so you don't have to worry about the hook and then just subtract that foot off later. Of course, on this job, the measurements were correct. So we moved on to checking the bolts themselves. On the mainframe column anchor bolts, we have 3/4 inch bolts here. They're almost always 3/4 inch. Sometimes on bigger buildings, they could be 1 inch. And those bolts are on both sides of the column web. They're 3 inches apart, but we show them on the plans 1.5 inches from the center of the web of the column. So 1.5 inches plus 1.5 inches is 3 inches. 20 foot minus 1.5 inches is 19 foot 10.5 inches, and 20 plus 1.5 is 20 foot 1.5 inches. Yeah, I'm sorry if this is remedial, but it's an easy thing to miss, and I've accidentally measured to a bolt at 20 foot. That was misplaced. I just saw 20 foot, and not noticing it's actually 1.5 inches out of whack. It can cause some problems later. So keep in mind that we're measuring to the center of the bolt and not to the edge of the bolts. Once the bolt placement has been verified, we can check the elevation of each of the column pads. And if those check out, it's time to start hanging some steel. If corrective action needs to be taken, we've got a video right here to cover most of the basic fixes and problems. I'm trying to keep these things short, so I'll cover bolt elevations in the next video. I'm actually going to record it right now, so if you're watching this video, that video should also be uploaded. So thanks for taking some time with me, and I hope that you find this helpful. If you have any questions that we haven't covered in this and the other videos, give us a call. We're always happy to help. And also, even if it isn't a Great Western building. Anyways, build great. I'll see you in the next video.